Okay, welcome to SJCO Presents. My name is Zoe Hammer, and I'm the director of the master's program in social justice and community organizing here at Prescott College. I'm very honored to be hosting today's webinar with my dear friend and colleague, investigative journalist and writer Todd Miller, to talk about his newest and fourth book, Build Bridges, Not Walls, A Journey to a World Without Borders. Todd Miller has researched and written about border issues for more than 15 years, the last 8 as an independent journalist and writer. He serves as a member of the faculty at Prescott College and has taught in the Cultural and Regional Studies program, as well as in the master's program in social justice and community organizing. Todd resides in Tucson, Arizona, but also has spent many years living and working in Oaxaca, Mexico. His work has appeared in the New York Times, Tom Dispatch, The Nation, the San Francisco Chronicle, In These Times, Guernica, and Al Jazeera English, among many others. He's a contributing editor on border and immigration issues for NACLA Report on Americas and its column Border Wars. Todd is the author of 3 previous highly acclaimed books: Border Patrol Nation, Dispatches from the Front Lines of Homeland Security, published by City Lights in 2014, Storming the Wall, Climate Change, Migration, and Homeland Security, also published by City Lights in 2017, and Empire of Borders, The Expansion of the US Border Around the World, published by Verso in 2019. And of course, his newest, Build Bridges, Not Walls. I just have to quickly note how outrageously productive Todd is, writing 3 books since 2017, while taking care of his incredibly cute, very young son and daughter, both of whom make appearances in Build Bridges. My personal favorite is the scene in which Todd has both William and Sophia in car seats cheering him on as he chases a Border Patrol agent around Puerto Rico. Carla's going to drop a link to Todd's website in the chat for more information on his work. And so that's I'll stop with the introductions. Welcome, Todd, and welcome everyone joining us today. I'm going to start by asking Todd a few questions, and we'll have a conversation, and then we're definitely going to take questions from the audience. So please put your questions in the Q&A. We have some questions that have been sent in advance from some of Todd's current and former students that I'm also going to share with us. But just as questions occur to you, please go ahead and drop them in the Q&A. Okay, Todd, so Build Bridges is a bit of a departure from your previous books in format. And I wanted to ask you to start by talking a bit about your opening reflection in the book, where you describe your encounter with Juan Carlos and how it shaped the questions that frame this book. Could you tell us the story, lay out those questions, and say a few words about why these questions are so important right now?
Sure, Zoe, thank you. It's also great to be here. It's always a special moment for me to be speaking through, I guess normally it's in a venue, but this time a webinar with Prescott College. I really owe a lot to Prescott College, and my first book was really written while I was studying journalism at Prescott College. My senior project resulted in my first book, Border Patrol Nation. So it gives me just extra pleasure to be here and to be with Zoe, my good friend Zoe, who we've just developed such a nice relationship over these years. So it's really I'm really happy to be here. And yeah, this new book is Build Bridges, Not Walls, is a departure in a lot of ways from my previous work. And I think yes, the best way to see the framing, to look at the framing of this book is to talk about the opening scene that really puts all the questions into motion. And in the opening scene, I first should say so the opening scene, I'm driving down a dirt road on the Tohono O'odham Nation in a pretty desolate part of the desert, about 20 miles from the border, and a man appears at the side of the road. Right before that, I was hiking up on the Babakivari mountain range in the Babakivari Peak. And I do want to mention that first, because I remember when I was hiking up, going up the kind of switchbacks that went up to the peak. and I was with an elder from the Tohono Nation, David Garcia. And as we were walking, I remember looking over my shoulder and through the saguaros and the ocotillo, and then into the vast kind of open sky and the open land and the mountain ranges that were in the distance, and really thinking, wow, I cannot see the border. I don't even know where Mexico begins. It doesn't even matter, right? It was like, for this moment, the border didn't exist, nor did it seem like even naturally that it should exist. It just, the landscape was whole. And then an hour later, or maybe it's an hour and a half later, I'm rumbling in the car, and there's this man that appears on the side of the road. I stop, I open up my window, and he approaches the vehicle, and I ask him if he wants a bottle of water. I happen to have one. I give him a bottle of water, and he says yes, and he drinks it. And then I do believe I give him some food as well. And in the meantime, he tells me he's from Guatemala, that he's been in the desert for a couple of days. And so when I asked him, is there anything else I can do for you? He responded by saying, can you give me a ride to the next town? And at that moment, the border, like the borderless world that I felt just moments before, or an hour before, vanished. And the border and all its weight came crashing down upon me, and my awareness again. And like, good decades of looking at this border and reporting on the border and knowing the intricacies of the border control system and the border enforcement system and the militarization of the border. Thinking about, I knew that there were green striped roving patrols in nearby. I knew that there were high scope trucks and high tech cameras, some that could see miles and miles away, that might have us in their scopes. I knew that there were drones that could be flying overhead, for all I knew, at 30,000 feet, who had their cameras upon us. For all I knew, we went over a motion sensor or something like that. So all this awareness came to me because if I were to give Juan, his name was Juan Carlos, he told me, if I was to give Juan Carlos a ride, that it would be considered a felony to further somebody's presence. And this really caused a big moment of hesitation, and from this book was born, really. The hesitation, which is a reflection of more than a decade, almost 20 years of reporting or working on the border. Also, and then being infuriated, literally infuriated that I had to even think of not giving somebody a ride. Like, it went against everything that I'd been taught as a little kid to do. If somebody is, in trouble, if somebody's in a distress situation, which was obviously the case with Juan Carlos. And as we know, so many people have died crossing the border through the desert. So it could have been a person that was facing death itself. To leave somebody like that seemed like an abomination, and against everything that I've been taught, in terms of everything you're taught in terms of values, and whether they be religious, spiritual, or just like ethical values. And that in itself caused a great deal of anger, all in this hesitation. And so it was really those two things, in the hesitation, and then taking that and consulting with so many different people about what these borders, what is a border, what are these for? If you're going to these values, it's obviously anti-kind, right? It's anti that basic core value of kindness, because I couldn't give, according to the law, I couldn't give Juan Carlos a ride. But what is this thing? So I ended up asking lots of people, from visionaries and philosophers to migrants and refugees to academics, scholars, journalists, border patrol agents, even border industry representatives, and like Zoe said, children, including my two children, William and Sophia. And William actually had one of the quotes that I think distills what I think is the spirit of this book the best, and that is he told me, and this was after an incident that happened in San Diego, and we were in San Diego. We were at the border field park in Imperial Beach, and really you can go right up to the border wall. So there's some people on Tijuana side of the border, and they were waving, and William started running towards them. And as he was running, he crossed some sort of invisible line that none of us saw, because there's a border patrol agent perched up on a kind of cliff looking over, and the border patrol agent like hit his horn. It was like that sound, and then there's this disembodied voice that said, "Please do not go any further." And so William stopped. He looked up. It was like the voice of God or something, and then he like he was actually 4 at the time, or 3 even. I think he might have been in almost 4, but 3. And like any good 3 or 4-year-old, he looked up, didn't know, and he continued running like to break the limits. And then the same thing happened again. There was this like, please stop, don't go any further. So that really caused William to, he sat down in the sand, and I went and sat with him, and then he got really meditative, and we started discussing what had happened. And then finally he said, why can't we turn the border wall into bikes? And to me, like that ability to take the material of one thing and transform it into another thing, I think that's at the core of what I think this book is about.
Thank you, Todd. Could you say a few words about why you think those questions are so crucial just right now, this moment?
Right. Yeah, the questions, there's a number, you can look at it from a number of different angles, but from a very political angle, you have a very interesting moment, and with the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, the Democratic Party really taking, interestingly enough, when you look at the border buildup over, I like to look at I mean, of course, it's been before the last 25 years, but this kind of massive buildup we've seen in the last 25 years, where there's now 700 miles of walls, between 20 and 21,000 armed border patrol agents, up from 4,000 in 1994, billions of dollars in technologies, and that sort of thing. That has been a bipartisan buildup, right? You look at the Secure Fence Act, for example, of 2006, and Senator Joe Biden voted for that. He voted for the border wall, and so did Hillary Clinton, and so did Barack Obama. My point is, it's been a bipartisan affair, this kind of fortification that we've seen. But what's interesting is that during the last 4 years, during the Trump administration, many Democrats, including really establishment ones like Joe Biden, their hands are forced to take a more pro-immigrant, at least rhetorically, more pro-immigrant stance, anti-wall stance, without ever really admitting that he voted for the 2006 Secure Fence Act, of course. But then, which brings us to a really super interesting moment. You have at least for this rhetorical, more pro-immigrant stance, and yet you have a Biden administration that's showing in the first 100 days that it's going to continue this long trajectory that we've seen, right, of this border buildup. However, what I think is present and could be just a really crucial moment is that there's this administration and the Democratic Party can be pressured much more easily than the Trump. Trump literally could not be pressured by, I don't think, by anyone really. And so that gives a really interesting moment, because rhetorically speaking, you have the press secretary saying that over and over again, we're looking for a humane immigration system. And my personal opinion, and I think one of the underlying currents in this book is there's no possible way that such a thing could exist. But the fact that she's staying humane, in fact, the fact that she's saying that is giving a space that for organization, for organizing, to be able to work with, to possibly be able to pressure this administration. So I think that brings us to a really interesting moment where maybe some of the things that I'm talking about in this book could be applied.
Yeah, fantastic. I really agree. Before we dive into the phenomenal range of ideas in this book, could you build on what you were just talking about, this moment of opportunity for organizers, for people involved in trying to build and scale up social movements, to potentially push things in a direction, more in a direction that we're going for, which is, as you say, not at all humane borders, since that is not a possibility, as we well know, after decades of proof, right?
Right.
Or not centuries, right? Do you see, what dangers do you see in that moment politically as well, where we have this, where the Biden administration has been forced to shift their rhetoric, despite Biden's history on this topic? Do you see, we're talking about opportunities. What do you think before we jump into the opportunities, do you see any dangers in this moment as well?
Yeah, I do. The danger is I think that is precisely for the same reasons why it's an opportunity, maybe. The idea, the framing of the border and immigration situation is so constantly put in this Democrat-Republican paradigm that that one might think, and when I say one, I might think of maybe even a vast swath of the population in the country, that getting rid of Trump solves the border issues, since there was so much focus on Trump around the border and immigration, that there was so much media given to what he was doing, and everyone knows all the different things. And then the thought, and I've seen it just about everywhere. This kind of movement over to Biden means that, oh, it's solved, that the situation won't happen again. And then when you look at the rhetoric, like the Biden administration has definitely taken a different sort of rhetoric, but you look at it, you kind of dissect it, and it's definitely just focused on Trump. It's focused on the last 4 years. I think demonic and chaotic policies was the last thing I saw of the last 4 years. The acknowledgement that this system has been built up over multiple administrations on both sides of the aisle, including the Obama administration, which Biden was the vice president, is not acknowledged. And so a very inaccurate depiction is given, and that inaccurate depiction translates into the media landscape, and the danger is that what the people that might have been active during the Trump administration and been willing to go to the streets or whatever, some sort of organizing in some other way, might think things are okay, and now are just like, yeah, everything's good. We don't even have to, the border immigration apparatus loses attention. So I think that's one of probably the biggest danger in terms of organizing that I see.
Absolutely. So drawing on that a little bit too, I think about the ways in which, your work and the, long time that I've been following your work in the books, as well as the ongoing journalism, is a real intervention in that, like really historicizes. And, in all of your books, you really trace these intense tentacles and layers of what you call the border industrial complex. Could you lay that out a little bit, to sort of as like that's kind of like the setting on which this rhetoric that you're talking about, this political rhetoric, is playing out? along this giant expansive regime and infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit about that border industrial complex?
Yeah, that's another, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another significant danger, as we might say, like looking at the border industrial complex, looking at, how the participation of industry and the border apparatus and how it's just exponentially increased, particularly in the post 9/11 era, but even before then. So that not only means like contracts are being doled out to companies such as Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and IBM and Palantir, and I can name a lot of them. And if you look at the last 12 years, or from 2008 to 2020, there were 105,000 contracts given out to the tune of $55 billion. And you look at that $55 billion number, and if you take the cumulative border and immigration budgets, enforcement budgets from, I believe it's 1975 to 2003, which is like 28 years, I think, that comes at $52 billion. So that just goes to show how much the budgets have really gone up, and then how much more there's a participation of this private industry. And then so it's the contracts, but then there's also like what happens in appropriate, like every year. If you look at the CBP ICE budgets or just like immigration enforcement budgets over the last 30 years, they increase every year. Every single year, it goes up and up and up and up and up and up and up. That's why you had 1.5 billion in 1994 with the beginning of the prevention through deterrence strategy, and you have 25 billion this year as Joe Biden takes office, which is higher than what Trump had in 2000. Wait, what year are we? 2020. In 2020, right? And then when Trump took office, it was $20 billion. So this idea that it all started with Trump is a bunch of crap, right? Because if it was 1.5 billion in Clinton, then that had to grow massively to get to 20 billion in 2017 when Trump sat in the White House. And so like looking at these budgets and how they grow, and when appropriations debates, which are pretty much how the budgets are doled out, they happen every year, but rarely is it anything in the public sphere, right? Like I've never asked about them. Have you ever been asked about those? No. Like I'm sure if you have been, please pipe up right now. But it's usually these debates happen, and the behind closed doors, there's meetings, and if you watch, these same companies that are getting contracts are able to get into these closed door meetings and influence the budgets and how they go up. And when campaigns are happening, these companies as well. In fact, the Biden, I just came out, or I co-wrote a report with a transnational institute looking at the 2020 campaign and the campaign contributions from the top 13 border industry companies. And when we were like crunching the numbers, I thought, well, I bet you it's going to be 50-50. That was my thought. I didn't think it was going to be disproportionately more to Trump, even though that might be the logical thinking. I thought it'd be 50-50 for sure, but it wasn't. It was actually the opposite. It was 3-1 to Biden from these border industry companies in terms of campaign contributions. And then we looked at the bigger sphere, like, okay, were they giving more to the Homeland Security Committee chair? Were they giving more to the appropriations chair? And lo and behold, they were. And it shifted entirely from 2016, where more Republicans were getting it, to more Democrats. So it's like when you're looking at this industry, it really is like it goes to the voting box and votes for both candidates, and boom, like it just becomes a win-win situation, and it's become a quite a powerful actor in this whole kind, and that's why it's complex, right? It becomes an industrial complex where a number of different government and industry and a number of different things all come together, and it just creates this growth pattern that's definitely happening, and the Biden administration is definitely in the middle, ensconced in that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Todd. The, so we have two kinds of stories being told about the border, right? That now, we've had many kinds of stories being told about the border, but we've had the like extraordinarily, white supremacist, racist rhetoric of Donald Trump now being contrasted against a more humanist, humane story about, oh, we can have a smart wall instead of having the aggressive barbed wire that they've been wrapping around it since Trump was in office. Meanwhile, it's still, killing people. It's still a killing machine, but and an environmental engine of environmental destruction. But what is so those are the two stories that we have, and they seem to be the opposite stories. But what's the actual, out of your research, how would you explain the actual function of the border? Like, what's it really there for? What's it really doing? Like on a macro scale, politically, environmentally.
Mhm. Yeah, I can just like tell you what the Border Patrol says, and it's pretty accurate. The border, when you talk to the Border Patrol, they don't, and I remember we were asking them left and right, from 2017 on, like, the wall, what about the wall? And they always made a big deal about saying, well, it's the wall is one part of the system. We have a system. It's called the border wall system. There's the wall, there's the armed agents, and there's the technology. All three of those come together and they form the system. And now what they meant by the system used to be that Border Patrol would actually lay out prevention through deterrence. It used to be they would say, oh, this blockades the border, and then that stops people from coming into urban areas, and then people have to go around into the desert, and that's dangerous, so that's a deterrent. They used to say that. But then I think the humanitarian aid movements that happened in the early 2000s, they stopped saying that. But what they mean by the border wall system is that is what they're saying. That border wall system is implemented in the cities, and then it creates the prevention through deterrence apparatus where it forces people to circumvent it. That has been the strategy since 2000 or since 1993 or 1994, I should say. And that's been the strategy. So when the Joe Biden administration comes in and says, oh, this is exactly what he said. He said, we're not going to build one more foot of wall. Instead, we're going to divert. And when I remember reading that sentence, divert, I'm like, oh, you're going to divert it to what? Like, are you going to divert it to education? Are you going to divert it to healthcare? Are you going to divert it to housing? Like, what are you going to divert it to? I actually paused there, and then I guess I wasn't surprised to see what the next clause was. We're going to divert it into technology. And then the whole idea is then that border enforcement technology in the ports of entry, border enforcement. Technology in ports of entry these days means more and more biometrics, by the way. And so what he's saying really is, and according to the Border Patrol lingo of the border wall system, Joe Biden is saying, I'm not going to build another foot of wall, but I'm going to continue to reinforce the border wall system, which does the same exact thing. So I read it as this, in that sense, it's the Biden administration and this kind of humane, like this language of humane immigration system that you see time and time again, is a layer of rhetoric that we got to look under and then understand we have to analyze this as he's doing the exact same thing, and really needs to be called on it.
Yeah, for sure. And then in Build Bridges, Not Walls, you also spend some time talking about like kind of the macroeconomic impacts of militarized borders dividing the global north from the global south, sort of, describe them as kind of ringing the planet. And what are those there for? We're told that they're to stop people from crossing the border, or, because of to protect jobs or what, or to keep our borders sovereign and all that sort of rhetoric. But how does it actually maintain, what status quo is it maintaining in a increasingly destabilized world?
Yeah, that's the question. It really is. I think that's just the key question of this. it's interesting when you think about sovereignty, and then you look at the U.S. Border Patrol and it's just violating everyone else's sovereignty. Like the U.S. Border Patrol is out in the world, give training other border patrols going to other countries. They've been in over 100 different countries, and this has been it's all part of another strategy. We talked about prevention through deterrence, which I think is a cornerstone strategy of the border. The other one I think is, and it's a twin pillar to it, is this externalization of the border. And this externalization means that there's all kinds of resources that are given to other countries, including equipment and weapons and armored jeeps and that sort of thing, and training and pressure. Like if you look at what's going on in southern Mexico and its buildup of its border, lots of pressure as well. And the whole idea, what the United States says is, oh, we're extending our border, we're expanding the zone of our security, we are externalizing our border to stop people long before they get here. And then when you look at it, it starts to entangle with the European Union that's doing the same thing. It's externalizing. Like people, I get the question all the time, oh, isn't the European Union the example, right? The Schengen area, and maybe that is. But what's happened is that while there's been freedom of movement within the Schengen area of the European Union, the outskirts, the perimeter has become more and more fortified. And the strategy has been to expand into like places like Turkey and Algeria and Morocco and Libya and Egypt. And that becomes, the border extends. And so when you start putting all these puzzle pieces together, like the US-Mexico border just becomes one more part of this vast apparatus of borders. And when you see who's doing it, like the countries that are doing it, and I've been to a few of these conferences where I've got to be the fly on the wall and listen to them talk about this stuff. They are literally talking about harmonizing borders. So it becomes like this elite, like I heard Australian Homeland Security people, US Homeland Security, Canadian, different EU countries, all talk about, oh, we're harmonizing our borders. And what the hell does that mean? You know, like we're bringing all our borders together, and then it's like, oh, geez, what is being developed is this kind of massive global apparatus, one that has, you know, I can look at all the budget numbers of the US-Mexico border, where you take the world, there's 70 some border walls. There's so many border patrols now. There's like when you look at the technologies we were just talking about, you have to take it on a global level, and just the markets for border technologies and Homeland Security. Like I think the projection for 2024 is $700 and something billion, which has gone up from 300 billion. When I wrote Border Patrol Nation in 2014, that was $300 billion then, and now it's 700 and I think 40 some billion dollars. So you're talking about like this just massively expanding thing. And then when you look at it, it's developed. It's like a harmonizing of elites, harmonizing of governments, while they're claiming national sovereignty, which I don't really think that's even thought about. And it's really, it becomes a kind of securocratic war, which is basically the main war that's happening right now, is elites going against the displaced, the dispossessed, the global north versus the global south, you could put it, or the colonizers versus the colonized, if you want to look at it from a historic perspective, or any which way you want to look at it. The divides are going between those who have like gone through the world and pillaged it and brought like the resources or the wealth to like places like the United States, European Union, and those that it was stolen from, you know. So you see that's where the borders are developed. It has a historical resonance. And now as we're seeing more and more people being displaced than ever before, and you add the ecological crises that are happening, and it's just, and you know, you see how it starts to develop. It becomes this kind of scaffolding of the status quo, a scaffolding that keeps business as usual, the kind of business that keeps, to oversimplify probably, but to keep the rich rich and the poor poor. Those sorts of that it's a scaffolding of business as usual, and I'm sure actually that's how you have to like look at the border system now. It's global. and it keeps the business as usual in place, and it goes hand in hand with military operations and other things. But the border itself that's one of the main purposes that it serves.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's just, I never heard that before. Harmonizing the borders. That's very interesting.
I heard that word like
term.
20 times. Like I was like, harmonize. And finally it dawned on me. I'm like, oh, there's something to what they're trying to say here.
Totally. And that and I really appreciate your point that, they claim this is about natural sovereignty, but no, national sovereignty. No, actually, this is like collaboration between a whole bunch of different nations. Given that, could you talk a little bit about the difference between, we're imagining a world without borders, the difference between open borders and no borders as a concept?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that's a good distinction, right? Because there's a lot of, and I guess you could make the you could say, well, open borders could lead to no borders, but they're very different, right? Like open borders is that, well, if we open our borders, perhaps we take away all the things we were just discussing, and then allow the freedom of movement of people, but the United States as a entity, as a political entity, would still exist. One of the biggest lessons, and I think this will resonate with some people at Prescott, was when I went to Maasai land in Kenya, and we went to the border there, and we came to a monument, and people that have been on the U.S.-Mexico border have probably seen the monument that delineate the border, and the same thing in the Kenya-Tanzania border. And there was nothing, right? There was zero. There was nothing. You could just cross back and forth, and with no problem whatsoever. And then I would talk to, and I'm guessing many people know Metame, from Maasai land, who works a lot with Prescott College. And Metame said, even though it was like completely, there's nothing there, there was that line, right? And he said, and Metame's mother was born in Tanzania, so he said, well, this is an egregious violation, right? And so what he means is, like, even though there's this could change, because that's what's happening with borders around the world. Those borders that were empty or semi-open can be militarized rather quickly if a country puts its mind to it. But Metame's point was that, like, it was an egregious, the border itself, it came from the Berlin Conference, which is the 1883 conference that divided up Africa, the continent of Africa, in Berlin by European powers. So it comes from the same colonialism, the colonial imprints, right? It is colonialism. And then like the Maasai cannot organize together. I mean, they can, but how that's structured, it divides the people in half. So half are in Tanzania, the other half are in Kenya. The Kenyan side has to organize with Kenya. The Tanzania side has to organize in Tanzania. So the border actually literally divides, like, there literally is a divide and conquer, right? It divides what would be a political force, and one to reckon with, because they already are even divided, but divides it in half. And so one of the bigger differences between open borders and no borders is, like, when you look at where borders, like the Maasai example is not unique. Like I remember going to the Jordan-Syrian border and talking to a man like the border had been closed since 2014. I was there in 2017. And he said, I go, what do you feel about the closed border? Because all you hear is, oh, of course Jordan's gonna, and he's like, I hate it. It's like, my grandmother's on the other, so it's like these borders are never decided by local people. They're imposed, like in that case by Great Britain, by England. And then you look around the world, and like the border here, the US-Mexico border, you talk to Tanahatam, and that border was just like imposed with no consultation whatsoever, dividing people. And so one of the big differences is, like, like in a no border project, which is the project that I would advocate, is also like moving to open borders. I think is actually good, because you perhaps that means, I think that would mean demilitarizing the border. It means allowing the freedom of movement of people. But a no borders means all of a sudden the imagination even grows more, right? The possibilities of organization, of people being able to come together who are artificially separated, or the fact, not even people like why, like when you think about climate change, if I'm in Southern Arizona, why can't I easily organize with my compas in Northern Sonora, you know, and be able to, like, because we're dealing with similar issues, and even though we can, and this can be done, it just makes it more and more difficult, and you have to organize with different political entities and that sort of thing. And so I think like that's one of the reasons, one of the big differences, like among many others, like whole, you know, like just, yeah, but I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you, Todd. Yeah, it just makes me think about, you know, one of the functions of the border regime is to remove barriers for elites to practice internationalism, and while imposing barriers for the rest of us to organize across
Yes,
national
exactly.
boundaries and many other sorts of boundaries. Yeah. It looks like we have some answers. Oh, there's a question from Ren Manning.
Ah. Hey, Ren.
Thank you for your work, Todd. Will you talk about the ways that a call for open borders is in fact a practical political project, as you mentioned? And what does it look like to live into the abolitionist vision of a world without borders?
Great question. Yeah, I think it's definitely a practical political project. Just again, if we look at what's going on with the Biden administration right now, and this, we're going to like create a humane immigration system, like which is being said, or we're going to fix a broken. This is my favorite one. We're going to fix a broken immigration system. You know that, and it's just like, come on. I mean, you see that stuff, and it's just, to me, I can't even handle it anymore. I look at it and I think this is just rhetoric that's said time and time again. It was said 10 years ago, it was said 15, 20, you know, it's just, when you think about what if you're going to go for, if this is the actual goal of a humane immigration system, fine, let's leave it at that. What would that be? The practical, obvious political project, if you're going to do a humane immigration system, would be to begin to demilitarize the border, and that has to be a project, right? It has to be like, it always amazes me that it's been now 25 years of prevention through deterrence, and more than 8,000 remains of people have been found, and we know that there's more. No More Deaths just came out with a new report and they estimate that it's maybe 3 to 10 times more than 8,000 people, given the amount of people that are looking for lost loved ones and other factors that they know about. And so you look at, you know, this, and you know that, like, we're going into May, we're in May again. We know this summer people are going to die that are healthy right now, and that's all part of the policy. And that's why people for years have been calling it a humanitarian crisis. It's a human rights violation, if you want to look at it that way. And it's like, if you want a humane immigration system, that is a complete logical place to start, right? To demilitarize, start, like, and then instead of saying humane, you know, like, I want to hear like end prevention through deterrence, because then you have the whole system that forces people to the desert, but you also have that prevention through deterrence strategy also means 100 other things, like the incarceration part of it, the Operation Streamline, that you're going to get a jail sentence if you cross the border, and you're going to be convicted, and if you're deported, you have something on your record. And then, of course, the whole ICE detention system of 200, at least 200. detention centers all around the country, all, you know, and just the horror stories in particular. I mean, even before last year, but now added with the pandemic and like the spread of COVID in detention centers and prisons. It's just like if you want to talk about a humane system, like they are saying they want to, so I'll take them at their word, then this is what you need to do. This stuff needs to go away. And so I think like that's what makes it a very practical political project. That's the words of Nandita Sharma and in a article that she wrote with a couple other scholars, that really, and Nandita's point was that not only open borders are, but no borders is a practical political project. And they lay out, you know, again, like all the stuff that we've been talking about, why, like how borders, they go in really in depthly in how borders actually, you are one person on one side of the border, but if you cross the border, your whole interrelationship with everything shifts, and it changes, you know, it changes and even how you are psychologically. And they go in depthly into that, right? And how that's also like, if you cross the border and all of a sudden you feel like you're hunted by a military apparatus of some sort, suddenly your whole psychology changes, right? And so this whole mentality, you know, that whole just there's just like, it is, my point is it is a practical political project. There's many different facets that you can look at. And I personally feel like right now, I think right now is the time. I think that this thing's been going on for a long time, and it's high time that the practical political project just goes up maybe a level, and there's a really we really start working towards that. And I know, Ren, you are a prime example of somebody who's working towards that on many different levels, from the work that you do on the border to the work that you've done in other places to who you are, you know. So I think you're a really good example of an answer to your own question.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. I really agree with I really agree with you, especially on everything, and especially about Ren. It's very good to have Ren here today. All right. I just keep talking and talking, and I have all these questions that other people have sent in. One of the things that you said struck me in terms of people talking about a broken immigration system. It's Miriam Kaba, famous organizer, abolitionist, and many other abolitionists like to say, like, the system isn't broken, like it's doing the thing it's supposed to do, right? Like,
yeah.
the more effort that we put into fixing it, claiming that it's broken, the stronger, the more that we strengthen it, right? I really appreciate those practical suggestions. Got to take some steps. I'm gonna click over to my document and find some of. I want to start with a question from Keelani Schuster, a student who took your class this semester at Prescott College, a sophomore who lives in Canada. And here I have to adjust my screen to be able to read this. Keelani asks, you spoke about how transformative it was for you to see the US from outside of its borders. How did this relationship shape your relationship with borders? And how did this experience shape your perception of US policies around migration? And I like this question a lot. Thank you, Keelani. And maybe as you respond to that, you could also connect it to like diving into like the third section of your book, where you really start to learning to think differently about how we understand borders and trying to sort of decolonize our imaginations, right? Our relationships with people, as you start with that moment of recognition that your actions are being controlled, even though you don't want them to be controlled by this apparatus. And let's get into let's make that transition into the vision of the world, the world where we're building bridges.
Yeah, sure. I immediately think of this moment I had in Mexico City, maybe about 15 years ago. I was in Mexico City, and I was on my way back to the U.S. and at that time I would always take the bus. But I was in Mexico City, and I had this, like, probably it was naive, or I don't know what it was. It's probably something I should have just noticed, but I noticed that in the Centro, in the Zocalo in Mexico City, if you stood by the Templo Mayor, which is basically the Mexica, the Aztec ruins that are right next to the cathedral. If you see the ruins of the archaeological site of the Aztecs, or the Mexica, and then you see behind that the cathedral, which was built in I think in 15 something, and so you have something like that was built. The Templo Mayor was built, I think, in that something like 500 years before that, and then the cathedral, and then there was the Torre Latinoamericana, which is like the biggest skyscraper in the center of Mexico City, and and you could see it all in one vision. I'm like, holy shit! You can see like 1,000 years of history in one visual, right? And then I went to the Plaza, the Local Plaza, where the student massacre happened in 1968, before the Olympics. And the same thing. They had this ancient cathedral, and this was actually it was a Tenochtitlan marketplace before this cathedral, and then the apartment buildings that were built in the 60s, where the students were shot, or where the army came in, was surrounding it all. I'm like, oh my god! So I had all these like epiphanies of just knowledge and history, and how things, this kind of layers of really deep history. And then I got on this bus and I went back to the United States. I'm telling you this story for a particular reason, because of I'm really I've lived in Mexico. I've gone to Mexico so many times. I've lived in Mexico for years, and just all the stuff that I've learned, just personally from being in Mexico. And so I on this particular time, I'm high off this epiphany, really. And I get on this bus, and it's a 32-hour bus to the border. And I get to the border, and I get off, and of course you get to the CBP, and it's just they start doing what they do, and you know what I mean, what are you bringing back from Mexico? And I wanted to say, I'm bringing back all this new kind of view of life. You know what I mean? This incredible realization that I had in that moment, how enriched I felt, and how enriched I felt, even in contact with history, and in the interconnectivity that I have, as a person, with many other places and histories, and I just felt just better than I was before. But yet, and I think I had an extraordinarily mean CBP person who was just blah, 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 blah. What are you bringing back? Did you, the only thing you can bring back is something negative. And the only thing you can bring back is oh, are you bringing contraband? Are you doing this? What were you doing? The only thing you could possibly be doing is something negative or something consumer. If you're a tourist in Cancun, that's fine, right? But and so that was one of the moments, I think that really, because I didn't actually write about that particular thing in this book, but I kept thinking back to that when I was writing, especially that third part of this world of divisions that's sown in so many different ways, from the brutalization of people that you see on the border, to this encapsulation of world views, and what you can think and how you can think, and what is possible and what is not possible. And one of the things that I've always, and this goes into some of the stuff that one of the things I really enjoyed doing in this book was finally give tribute to a lot of time I spent in Chiapas in the early 2000s and with the Zapatistas. And that whole that whole like understanding, my whole understandings of the world, shifted just being in the proximity of like Zapatista organization, how it was organized, and being close to that through in various ways. And so like and then yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, like the border, you can think of borders in so many different ways, but one of the big things to me in this idea of like where you get to build bridges, which is like when you build bridges, when you think of a bridge, it's like an engineering project, but in one way, right? But it's like it's a project of connectivity, right? You are able to connect from one place to another, from one maybe landmass to another, from one people to another people, and it's precisely the opposite of walls and those sorts of interconnectivities, like in my own of global solidarity. And I think that's what I'm really trying to get at in this book, is this how important global solidarity is, and how the huge problems that are facing the globe, from climate to the pandemic to the economic dispossession to all of it. I think the solutions are in these sorts of cross-border experiences with organizing, coming together, building bridges, those moments. And it seems like that, to go back to that experience with the CBP, that moment of feeling of this insane and this incredible connection with something much bigger, and something that's going on in Mexico, and based on all of these things, and then watch it like the door shut from the CBP also gave me like this, like not only how CBP does it. CBP is a reflection of the greater United States, and how even the media system does it, right? Even like when I'm on certain interviews about, say, this book, certain ways I answer might not be I have to figure out how to answer questions a little bit differently than I'm doing now, right? And just to be able to go around and go get into different angles, and really understand that when you remove, one of the things about demilitarization and removing it is that the bridges, the connections, the interconnectivity naturally starts to happen by removing it. It's like, again, it goes back to this thing, like you're inhibiting organization, you're inhibiting the power of the people, really. And I really, I think it's important to see borders as that, right? That a global movement is what could really bring this whole thing down and transform it into something else. Because I think one of the main things people are afraid of is there are a lot of people in the globe and very few, and the borders help keep people separated, yeah. So that, I think that begins to touch on what I think we're trying to get at here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that, Todd. I'm going to go to, I think that will tie into another question that I have from another amazing Prescott College alumni, Kai DeVault. So
Kai.
Hi, Kai. Kai asks, can you speak about the current escalation of Israeli violence going on in Palestine, and what possibilities for international organizing and solidarity are you seeing?
Yeah. I've been watching the bombs fall on Gaza, as it seems like this whole thing is on repeat, right? Every few years, it seems like we're watching yet again, like a residential building explode and crumble to the ground, yeah, I think the possibilities of international solidarity and connecting it to what we were talking about now are really rich in Israel, in Palestine and Israel. And I've gone there a few times on research trips myself, and one of the things that I was looking into was the day-to-day grind of Homeland Security. What I mean by that is that Israel has gotten a reputation of being, or according to one of its scholars, the Homeland Security capital of the world. And this kind of developing of the border wall system, like if we go back to the border patrol, the border wall system, that's been developed along the Gaza Strip, along the West Bank. There's a synergy between the United States and Israel in this sort of development of this border wall system. You go and look at it, and it's very similar. It's even, I would say, it's, if you want to compare, which I hesitate to do, but I will, but it's worse, right? Because in Israel, Palestine, there are highways that go through the settlements, and you only can be on that highway if you have a certain license plate. If you don't, you can't. So this idea of apartheid and this segregation and apartheid, when this term is used, it's not hyperbolic. It's definitely, that's what is happening. And then the main thing that I've looked into is this, how like all kinds of technologies and strategies are being tested out in places like Gaza and the West Bank and other places, Golan Heights, and on the borders with Egypt, and on the border with Jordan, and on the border with Syria, that are then exported, whether it be technologies that are being used or the strategies themselves, and they get exported by selling of technologies, but also training and that sort of thing. That sort of kind of United States-Israeli relationship is very prominent, and in fact, I think that might be the most prominent relationship the U.S. has. And I would say, like, the space of solidarity that I look for, and it doesn't have to be this for everyone, but for me is like what I saw there on the day-to-day grind, like going this, like how this Homeland Security apparatus is enacted, how then it is then said, oh, this is great, we can now sell it to the world or export it to the world. And then I think of like one Palestinian family that I visited in the West Bank, whose house was completely surrounded by a border wall, completely. Like you go in, you have to go through this really narrow, it looks like a long driveway that you'd see in a suburb, but it's really the border wall coming by a settlement, and then two sides of a settlement. So you go through this like gauntlet, really, because there's all these cameras on it, and to get to the house, and then the house is completely surrounded, and there's like electronic sensors going through the border wall, that sort of thing. And that's like the day-to-day. I mean, every single day, this family has to deal with that, and that's just a big example of some things that everyone has to deal with. And so I think that the ability for solidarity is really, really rich. And one little point on that, there's an organization called Stop the Wall, and they're based in Ramallah in the West Bank, and they have engaged in solidarity with a ton of them, including people that you probably know, like Amy Wan went to Palestine. Nellie Joe David went there and saw how like the IFTs, the integrated fixed towers that are now being built on the Tanata Nation, were first built in along the community in the West Bank. And so those sorts of solidarities, cross-border solidarities, are happening. And I think there's like lots of points to enter those. And I think, the border one is definitely one you can do that, where you can do that.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that example of solidarities, and your comments really resonate with me about the way that things get tested out in the border, that the border is a testing ground, that, the first drones were flown over the US-Mexico border, and now there's drones everywhere. All sorts of technologies. Obviously, there's a real exchange between Israel and the United States governments in terms of and industries. In terms of testing things out, seeing if they work, perfecting them. And, the same thing can be done with solidarities, right? You can also have an amazing testing ground
Yeah.
for finding new ways to connect and build work together. So I think that's, kind of the spirit of this book. Could you talk about, kind of the abolition chapter a little bit? The third section of the.
Sure. I mean, that's, I think, in a lot of ways, when you think of border, the solidarity to me is what I came out. That's like, that is the abolition, right? Looking at how abolition, how it's often put, right? You, of course, removing the prison is really important, but the whole, all these, so the conditions that make the prison the quote unquote answer or the solution to the problem, and that sort of digging into the real issues, right? That's so significant in the abolitionist movement, as it's so well articulated by Ruth Wilson Gilmore, for example, and yourself, Zoe, actually. And so when you think about it in borders, then I really like, one of the things in this book, I begin with, the Juan Carlos and then him needing help, right? Right, like he needs help, he needs a ride, he needs water. And then it comes to a realization where I realized, that I'm the one that needs help, right? That I'm the one that, if I'm going to find out, like often the border itself is designed, is this, again, to use that mentality, that sort of logic, a solution to a problem that in Juan Carlos' case was 1,500, 2,000 miles away, right? Or, in other words, the real issue was not being addressed, right? And so like one of the big conclusions was, like, in this book for me, was that we talk all about the border a lot, and then here and there, and experts will say this and other people will say that, we have to do this, and we need comprehensive immigration reform, we need to, like, we need to I guess that was a flip. We need to fix the broken immigration system. Maybe we need to break the broken immigration system. But those sorts of things are always, like, really out there that are not putting, I think that's taking our minds away from this, what would be more of an abolitionist perspective. And the abolitionist perspective would be like, Juan Carlos, how did you end up walking in the desert for 2 days, right? How did you? I know it's because of the prevention to deterrence, and that forces you into the desert. But why? What were the reasons? Like, what are the reasons why? Like that? Like, why did you have to come all the way from Guatemala? Why? What was the thing that was going on? Like what are the historical elements? From the U.S. military aid and the training of, like, homicidal generals in Guatemala, for example, in the 1970s and 80s, to, like, the United Fruit Company, instigating a coup, pretty much CIA instigating a coup through the United Fruit Company in 1954. So you have this, like, this you talk about 1954 United Fruit, but that's still the same sort of mentality, right? The company, when you look at economic neoliberalism, right, that's the companies like United Fruit or Chiquita Banana now are those that are in charge. They call the shots. They probably make somebody like Juan Carlos be marginalized, or perhaps that's the case. Like he's from, like, a small community, and that that's where the historic injustices have been done, and now and they continue to happen. And now there's a drought that comes, like you're hearing, for millions of small farmers that is just intrinsically tied with the changing climate, just indisputably now, right? That's causing like displacement after displacement. And so you look at all of that, and that's when the border thing becomes really uncomfortable, right? If you're looking at it, then you're like, oh, the United States, my country, right, is playing a part in all of this. And it's playing a part in the displacement of people in Central America, right? If in climate change alone, 700 times more carbon emissions since 1900 than Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador combined. I mean, any ethical consideration of that, you're like, oh, there's an ethical obligation, right? And instead, like the United States is bolstering up it's building a bigger border wall, right? It's still building up its, and so that's where I think really, you know, this kind of like this abolitionist perspective, which I think is, there's a twin pillar to it, like the demilitarization of the border definitely is a part of it, right? And the dismantling of it and taking away prevention through deterrence and the freedom of movement. And then the other side is creating a humane world where the border is just no longer I hate to use the word because I don't think it is, but necessary in quotes, right? Where, you know, and the right to stay home, the right, like the freedom of movement and the right to stay home. And to really understand, to get the right to stay home part of it, then from a United States perspective, instead of building up its borders, it should be doing an assessment of its foreign policy, its economic policy. Have these caused displacements? Have, you know, all these questions should be asked. And I think like that's where I think but what's going to happen is, you know, of course, from a governmental perspective, I don't know if that's going to happen. So it's up, I think it then becomes up to us, right? Like from a grassroots level to really bring in this on a grassroots cross-border international organizing. And I think that's where, you know, what borders are trying to do is stop that from happening. And by doing that, you start building the bridges, you know, coming together, collaborating. You know, it's me, like the one that needs to ask Juan Carlos, you know, what is a more humane world? What is a more humane world for you? What would be something in your life? Did you really want to do it? End up in the desert for 2 days walking? Or was there something, you know, it's talking and listening and coming together and understanding our interconnectivity, which is artificially divided by these borders. And so I think, I mean, that's really the first thing I think of.
Thank you, Todd. I love that. It really makes me think about, in abolition, we often talk about prisons not just not solving the problems they claim to solve, but actually causing the problems they claim to solve.
Right.
And, you know, you can really see that in the examples that you just laid out so beautifully about the ways that, you know, we've talked about the ways that the global border regime serves a function of keeping that system of systemic inequality, sometimes we call it capitalism, in place globally, and then trying to, and which causes, you know, exacerbates climate change, you know, political displacement, all sorts of things that drive people, that displace people. And then we're trying to solve that problem by keeping that regime in place. So that, so I, you know, and then I also think about, I'd love it if you talk a little bit about the concept of interdependence that you get into pretty deeply in the third section of the book.
Interdependence, like
just the as the a part of the I'm using a different metaphor, but the decolonizing of our imaginations, the, you know, the unbordering, the undoing of the borders in our imaginations, in our relationships, in our ways of understanding, that you're digging into, tied to this idea of, you know, the imperative, like when you said, you know, clearly Juan Carlos needed help, and then you realize that you also need help as well, right? That we are all not the same kind of help, obviously, but that we are, you know, we are being harmed by the same system. not in the same ways, but certainly that, we have a radical interdependence that
Yeah.
the basis, that is the basis for that solidarity.
Yeah, yeah, and that's like I think that's the recognition of that, right? It's this artificial division from many different ways. Even the fact that like Juan Carlos is in the desert, he's invisible, like so many people are invisible, and literally it's a stroke of luck that there was any sort of like meeting at all, right? Most likely that wouldn't have happened, and or he would have just stumbled out in a border patrol and got him, and he would have been deported or something. And so like that, like this it's like the interconnectivity. I think like one way, I guess there's many different ways to look at it, but like I think climate is a really, it's like a really good way way to look at it, and or even starting with the pandemic, right? You have a pandemic right now, and we have the United States, which is oh, we're getting lots of vaccines distributed, that's great, but then you look at the rest of the world and it's like, oh, there's considerable inequality with the rest of the world and how vaccines are being distributed, and then you're like, surprise, because that's like everything else. And then when you think of it in the pandemic sense, it's like, oh, well, that means COVID's still going to keep on going, right? And that means what if like a vaccine resistant variant, like just to think in even practical terms, and then that comes, and so the point is that like you gotta, it's a global issue. You have to come together as a globe. You can't just have this territory that's bounded and say, oh, this is the only place that it matters. It really is. There's an interconnectivity. Like there's this great cartoon of this general that's at a border wall, and he has his binoculars, and he has missiles. There's missiles coming out of the border wall, and his assistant, while he's looking like into the distance, his assistant's looking up with his binoculars, and he sees like a coronavirus like floating, like lazily floating over it. Right. So it's like with the coronavirus, of course, like quarantining and all that stuff and isolating yourself if you have it is good practice. But closing borders and Title 42 and all the different stuff that we're seeing, and that is like defying the interconnectivity, that's the global solidarity, really the global coming together that's going to be necessary to solve this. And the same with climate. And I mean, I think the pandemic's just a like appetizer for climate. I mean, I want to say what's to come. I should say what's here and what's predicted to be worse. And I think like one of the biggest things I look at is you look at the 28 or 27 UN summits of all the nation states coming together and talking about what some scientists, many people say are the biggest threat to humankind that we're facing, right? The climate change. And then you come to 2019 after 26 summits, you have a Paris Accord is pretty much the only thing that's come out of it that's tangible, and that's non-binding. And then 2019, you have more emissions than ever before on a global scale, and 2020 doesn't count because of the pandemic. But what are they doing, right? Is this like what's happening is that you have the UN summits, and then the big countries like the United States, and the United States is notorious. Like when I was doing Storming the Wall research, I heard like behind the scenes stories of how the United States really gets its elbows, like stops things from really happening. I remember talking to Yeb Sanya, who was the Philippines, like the climate negotiator for the Philippines in 2013, 2012. And he has all these stories about how the big powers, and he had one about the United States and one about Australia, how any sort of constructive sort of proposal was like not even allowed to the table. Phone calls that were supposed to happen didn't happen. And you look at that and you think, and now you see like the sea level rise and the hurricanes that hit Honduras right at the end of last year, or just, you think of the floods and the droughts and the wildfires in California, and you're like, what the hell are you doing? You know, this needs to be, and then you think it's not able to be done through these nation states and the way they're organized and the way they're just not going to come up with a solution. It's just not going to happen. And so then it goes back into this interconnectivity. It comes back into like, okay, something like else needs to be done. Some sort of way of people, because on one hand, the international summits aren't solving it. On the other hand, that's exactly the key, is like people coming together. And I remember in Paris when I went in 2015, I went there and just seeing all these like indigenous groups from all over the world come together, and there's a whole conference around them and the different ideas as stewards, right, of jungles and forests, and just knowing precisely what was happening in these localities, and having precise like ways of thinking about how to do it. And then these groups and this whole conference of coalition of people and groups were not invited to go in. Like they were just like kind of marginalized. Oh, they put up their resolution that didn't even make it into the accord. And it's like, okay, I think that at least people were invited, right? But that's where I think we need to turn, because that's when we're in the borderless world. That's when we're thinking about things in this more global connectivity sense, the interconnectedness, the idea that one country can't save itself while another country can, and those sorts of things. And I think like are the biggest pressing problems that we're facing I don't really think that can be solved as nation states as we have it right now. I mean, they can. I think, again, if we go back to movements, I think movements are much more powerful and subvert these kind of sovereignties, as they were called, nation states, right? So it can happen, but I think like it's structurally and organizationally against anything happening. So you have to move against that current and kind of break down these barriers. And I think it's when you get into like when you just go into these to go back to cross-border solidarity, that's where I think and movements, I think that's where the real power to really come up with some sort of answer to these climate. And I'm just using climate as one example. You could use a bunch of other examples. But for climate, that's where I think the hope lies.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're sort of wrapping up our time period here. Do you have any final comments you would like to make, Todd?
Well, I think honestly, I really think the SJCO program and Prescott College and a lot of things that Prescott College does, and your teaching, Zoe, and how you look into movements and how the border has been like really prominent, along with like looking at prisons and how the teachings around abolition. I think what you're doing and a lot of what Prescott College is doing is really creating like groundwork, and I've seen it so many times with my own eyes, and just the connections, like the stories I talked about Kenya, is because Prescott College, I was able to go there and do research because Prescott College was already there and working in this kind of not imposing sort of level of development as this top-down development model that you see just time and time again, neoliberal economics, capitalism, and more of this horizontal cooperation of solidarity, and how movements are built with diverse groups of people, right? And diverse groups of people in every single sense of the word, even from being racially diverse to being like class, diverse in terms of class, diverse in terms of ideas, diverse in terms of issues, and those sorts, when those things start to come together, like you've taught me, Zoe, and you have so many examples of different coalitions that have developed to achieve, like prisons closing down, and of allies, groups allying with each other that you wouldn't normally think that would go together, and those sorts of fronts, and that those sorts of abilities to organize. I think that there's so much power in that, and I see so much of that teaching at Prescott and what you do. And I just think you're really good examples. And as Ren and Kai, both who had questions earlier, are also both really good examples. And I'm sure other people here, Kalani as well, so I guess that's what I wanted to say.
It's a very sweet, kind thing to say, Todd. Thank you very much. I definitely agree that movement, that's the center of our work in SJCO, but certainly it's center of many, many, many people's work around the world, and including yours. And I really appreciate so much the work that you do. Your books are amazing. To teach all of them. And I just love working with you, also having the opportunity to teach together. So thanks so much for doing this webinar with us today. And I highly recommend that people get this book. Is that look backwards on the screen, or does it look?
No,
it
looks
backwards.
It might be backwards. Maybe it is. I don't know. It looks, I could read it. The letters were correct.
Okay, great. So thanks so much, Todd.
All right. Thank you. Bye.